is a very bad idea in progressive chess, but castling long is actually not as bad as castling short. You wind up with more space, and that's in this particular case, black cannot get to white's king in a mere 6 moves. And now it's really difficult for black. He's getting checkmated in many lines, and it's very, very hard to find a series that doesn't just lose. Black really needs to get one of the white rooks off the board on this series and avoid checkmate. But if he moves the king off the back rank, he winds up running into the same type of trouble we saw in the last game, where a pawn promotion or a rook can just clear his whole back rank like a scythe. So in this position, I found this idea: knight d7, knight gf6, knight takes d5, knight c3, knight takes d1, c5, and this combination of 2 moves, knight d7 and c5, was enough to stop checkmate, and the king managed to stay on the back rank, and that's the key for black to win this position. Even though all he ate was a rook, and I'm only up 5-4 in the piece count, white's king is now a little uncomfortable on c1. The major threat of checkmating with the white rook is gone, and now white is facing the same trouble that he can't get off both of the black rooks on the 7, and because he did need a rook on the 5, he's now looking at some serious trouble on the 8. He found a pretty good try, though, on the 7. King takes d1, bishop c4, king d2, knight e3, knight f3, e6, e takes d7. So he is up 4-3 pieces, but black has 2 rooks, so we expect there to be a lot of destruction coming on the 8. And there was king takes d7, rook e8, rook takes e3, rook takes f3, rook f4, rook takes c4, rook c1, rook takes h1. And this is one of those positions where black doesn't care about white being able to promote a pawn, because he just has so much material that he'll be able to counter-promote on the 10 and finish white off. And in fact, that's what happened. h4, h5, h6, h takes g7, g takes h8, queen, queen takes h7, queen takes h1, f3, queen d1. There was no safe square. There was no way to set up a fortress to stop these queenside or kingside pawns from promoting. He played f3 and chose to stop the kingside pawns, but now the game is a simple win on the queenside. a5, a4, a3, a takes b2, b1 queen. I did not need to under-promote here because I'm going to checkmate him. Queen e4, b5, b4 to cover c3, bishop d6, and bishop f4. And that used all 10 of my moves to deliver checkmate. Alright, so moving on. e4, e5, f6 is a very interesting try. And after queen f3, queen takes f6, queen takes d8, black can try to swarm with this series. King takes d8, bishop c5, knight f6, rook f8. This is a surprisingly effective series in the sense that there's pretty much no way for white to eat 2 pieces, despite what it looks like, because he's just facing an enormous amount of mating threats on the back rank on f2. This bishop, this bishop, the knight, and the rook, and even this knight in a lot of lines, combined with things like threatening to promote on c1. There's just an enormous number of mating threats here. So this is another example of trying to defend against a swarm and needing to come up with the ultimate spare move. If we have to get rid of 1 piece of black's, since we can't get rid of 2 without getting checkmated, if we can only get rid of 1 piece, we would like to get rid of that rook on f8, because the major pieces are still the most important things to get rid of, even though these look scary. It's the rook on f8 that we should be setting our sights on. And in this case, if we look at this series, knight f3, knight g5, knight takes h7, knight takes f8, this is a very powerful material part of the series. We eat the rook on f8. The pawns on the king side are now extremely mobile and set up to win on future series. But the big problem is we're still getting checkmated in an enormous number of lines. There's a standing threat of checkmate with bishop g4 and knight takes c2. There's also a standing threat of checkmate with bishop g4 and knight takes c4, bishop takes f2. There's also a threat of checkmate with for example, bishop g4 and a5, a4, a3, ab, bc, queen, and king e2 gets ghosted, and none of these spare moves help. Like if we play d4, we still get checkmated. If we play f4, we still get checkmated. d3 still gets checkmated. f3 still gets checkmated. Knight c3 still gets checkmated. In fact, there's only one move that white can play here. Even bishop e2 gets checkmated because it gets checkmated on c2. So it turns out there's only one spare move that white has here to avoid checkmate. And in that case, the spare move actually just comes down to can you calculate whether or not you're getting checkmated. So it's not really finding a move that accomplishes a particular purpose or strategic goal. You're simply finding the one move that avoids mate and allows you to play the material grab that you want to play. In this case, the strong move bishop d3. There's now no promotions because it simply takes too long to get a bishop to g4 or to cover e2 and get something on c1 to checkmate. And in addition, d3 guards the knight c2 ideas, and it gives the f1 square to the king and stops the f2 ideas. So this is yet another example of an incredible spare move in bishop d3. So that should illustrate a bit of some of the way your thought process should work in choosing your final move. Now I'm going to look at sort of more large-scale defensive concepts that apply to the whole series. First example I'm going to look at is that of scattering, which is simply throwing your pieces to the four corners of the board, making them difficult to capture. Now we've seen this a lot in series that I've already previously shown. Usually it's part of other series that involve harassing checks, promotions, all sorts of things I've already talked about. But I'll just go ahead and show some good ideal examples of this. So this is another game from 1998, Vargio versus Rolf Sicker. E4, D5, Knight C6, Queen G4, Queen C8, Queen D8, King D8, Knight F6, D takes E4, H5, a very famous series which should lose. D to D3, D takes E4, Bishop G5, Knight H3, King D2. This is an attempt to swarm back. And white is up in material, but neither of these four and fives were not particularly good. But this 6 is kind of interesting. King D7, Rook B8. A very strange move. Knight A5, even stranger move. And then Knight H7, Knight takes G5, Knight takes E4, check. And now we see that Black has only ended the material race equal. It's 5 to 5. With the same piece configuration, even Black's just up one pawn. He has, however, ended his series with Jack, and he's decided to do something I call scattering, which, in this particular position, it actually looked kind of effective. It's easy for White to take, for example, spin 3 moves to get the knight on e4, but it's actually hard for him to take anything else. By putting his rook on b8, it neither can be promoted through easily, nor can it be taken by this bishop. On a8 it could just be taken in a series with bishop takes b8, and now that's not possible. So this is a series that I think is actually a good example of illustrating the power of scattering, which is just putting pieces on awkward squares so they can't be captured very easily. And in fact, the series that White played, although it seemed to avoid checkmate, did not really solve his problems. King e1, b4, b takes a5, knight c3, knight takes e4, f4, bishop e2. This is always a bad sign when you're having to spin 2 moves of your series, just kind of making spare moves like this. The only time you should be doing this is if the rest of your series was so good and so what you wanted to play that it's worth spinning, and you needed to spin both those moves to get out of checkmate. So in this case, Black still has a simple material win: g5, g4, g takes h3, h takes g2, bishop g7, bishop takes a1, e6, g takes h1 queen, and in fact White resigned here because his white bishop is still completely ineffective. It's very takes way too many moves for him to get the queen and the rooks off, and in fact none of his pawns are promotable in this position. They're all blocked. Which is another defensive concept that I'm going to talk about in this video a little bit, which is that of blocking, which is sometimes is very powerful to simply arrange your pieces such that they block the enemy pawn promotions, and that's not really a hard technique to spot. If you have an A pawn, you just want to put something on the A file. But this configuration of putting something on the B file such that even though you have a b7 pawn, an a pawn can't promote because it's blocked. Its path is directly blocked after it captures. This is worth observing. So we'll look at another example of scattering. This is an excellent game played between I believe he's a math professor Noam Elke's. I want to say at Harvard. I'm not sure I'm remembering that right though. And Fred Galvin is the winner of the 1996 championship and has the white pieces, but black gave him a very good game here. So d4, c5, c takes d4, e4, e5, f4, e6, d3, d takes c2, c takes d1 queen. This is definitely the correct series, sending forth the minimal amount of material to eat the maximal amount of material. King takes d1. And I don't think this series is. I really think white is probably lost, and that f4, e4, e5 is not very good. Although it's a very menacing looking series. White played king takes d1, f5, f takes e6, e7, e takes d8 queen. Black should probably actually be winning here with a strong material grab. Something involving. Taking the rook on a1 with the bishop or something like that, but instead king takes d8, d6, d takes e5, b5, king c7, bishop g4 check. So what we see here is black has just done nothing. The piece count is still 6-6. He's delivered a check. It's not a harassing check. It doesn't really cause white any trouble whatsoever. And he's gotten his king safe. That's about all we can say. So this is going to be a material win. Black's king is perfectly safe with all these open squares around it. But white will proceed to win rather easily by just material means. Bishop e2, bishop takes g4, bishop f3, bishop takes a8. And now king e2, knight c3, knight d5 check. Note that the only spare move here was king e2, and he used the remaining moves to deliver check. This is a familiar pattern we've seen before of the power of a bishop defending a knight, so they cover a nice variety of squares together, and so this would qualify as a harassing check. So black tries to survive with an interesting try, which is scattering. Knight f6, bishop b4, rook c8, rook takes c1, rook takes a1, knight takes d5, knight f4 check. The black pieces are actually nicely scattered here. It's kind of hard to get to